From having space lasers to orchestrating wars and even controlling the global population, the Rothschilds are subject to numerous conspiracy theories. In fact, the family's vast wealth, influence, and secrecy have fascinated people for over a century, so much so that it's difficult to separate facts from myths. So, who really are the Rothschilds? Is the family the richest on the planet? Here is the true history of the Rothschild banking dynasty. It all began in the early Middle Ages Europe. At the height of its conquest, the Roman Empire had spread all over Europe, taking Christianity with it. Back then, Christianity was inseparable from political power and the law, and it continued to rule for many centuries. And while this worked well for most of the population, who were Christians, it wasn't favorable for the minority non-Christians, including the Jews. During these times, Jews didn't have a state to call home, and so were spread across different parts of Europe. But not all countries were welcoming, with those that were typically confining the Jews to a small location. This was the background in which the Rothschild banking dynasty patron, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, was born in 1744 in Frankfurt, Germany. The Rothschild banking family. Rothschild was born to Amschel Moses Rothschild in a densely populated street in Frankfurt called 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐢𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻, which directly translates to Jewish Alley. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐢𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 was a low-income area with most of population being poor. During these times, buildings weren't identified with numbers. Instead, they used signs. For the Rothschilds, the sign at the front of the house was a red shield, which translated to Roth and Schild in German, hence the family name. At this time, banking, as we now know it, wasn't in existence yet. Plus, Christianity, which primarily governed medieval Europe, including Frankfurt, forbade Christians from lending money at an interest. This left the profitable trade to Jewish families, who not only handled the lending business, but financial services as a whole, passing down the craft through generations. The Rothschilds were no different. Amschel Moses Rothschild, Mayer Rothschild's father, was a currency changer and coin collector in the early and mid-1700s. At the tender age of just 13, Mayer Rothschild secured an apprenticeship job at the Simon Wolf Oppenheimer banking firm in Hanover, working under Jacob Wolf Oppenheimer. Here, he started learning about currency exchange on a broader scale, and, what would be even more important later in his career, foreign trade. A few years later, he would take over the family business from his father, with a special concentration in collecting rare coins. He had such a huge collection of these coins that his business attracted the attention of many, including aristocrats. However, his most prominent client was the Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, whom he had met in 1769. At just 25 years old, he had earned the title of court factor, overseeing the collection of taxes in Wilhelm's territory and ensuring their safekeeping. The Crown Prince, happy with Mayer Rothschild's services, connected him to other princes and prominent people, expanding the business even further and making Mayer Rothschild a rich man. He would continue to serve the Crown Prince even after becoming Wilhelm IX, Landgrave of Hesse Castle, in 1785 following his father's death. Up until this point, Mayer Rothschild operated in Frankfurt. It was not until the French Revolution of 1789 to 1799 that he started doing international trade on a broader scale. Now, Wilhelm IX had strong relations with Britain, being George III's cousin, the King of Britain at the time. And so, Britain made an agreement with Hesse to supply mercenaries in exchange for money. Of course, Mayer Rothschild, being the court factor, handled the payments. By the turn of the 19th century, Rothschild had become Wilhelm's undisputed international banking manager. With his name and access to vast Landgrave wealth reserves, he started lending internationally, thus making himself not only more famous in the banking sector, but also richer. But with the ever-increasing threat of Napoleon, Mayer Rothschild knew that the massive Wilhelm fortune he had managed to keep safe was in danger if he kept it in Frankfurt. With his knowledge of the international market, he devised a plan to venture abroad through his 5 sons. The Rothschild banking empire takes over Europe. Mayer Rothschild got married to Guttl Schnapper in 1770 and had many children. But it is his 5 sons who would take on his legacy and make it even bigger. It all began when Mayer Rothschild decided to send his 3rd son, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, just 21 years old at the time, to Britain. His mission was to open a currency business in England. Remember, it was a tradition in Jewish families to introduce the sons to the family business at a young age, as they would later inherit it. So, Mayer Rothschild's children were already well acquainted with their father's trade by the time they reached adulthood. Now, Britain was the ideal destination to establish the first branch of the family business abroad because Mayer Rothschild already had interests and investments there, thanks to Wilhelm. So, armed with $20,000 in capital, which translates to about $2.2 million by today's standards, and his father's instructions, Nathan Rothschild set out for London to lay the foundation for what would be the most successful branch of the family business. Though Nathan didn't see success immediately, by 1804, he was already dealing in the London Stock Exchange, and in 1805, he had built a sizable fortune trading bills of exchange. A few years after sending his son to Britain, Napoleon reached Hesse, forcing Wilhelm into exile. Luckily, Mayer Rothschild had already planned for this eventuality and transferred most of Wilhelm's money to his son Nathan, who multiplied it by loaning it out to the British Crown, still under George III. By doing this, Wilhelm continued to help Britain fight Napoleon, hoping to take back his power in Hesse. Mayer Rothschild also secretly traded imported goods from abroad, despite Napoleon's ban on such trade, and made huge profits from it. Then, in 1809, Mayer Rothschild began to deal in gold bullion. This would become the foundation of his later financial empire, N.M. Rothschild and Sons. However, in 1812, at 68, Mayer Rothschild died, having earned the title Founding Father of International Finance. The Frankfurt business went to his eldest son, Amschel Mayer Rothschild, as was tradition. Nathan Rothschild remained in London and continued to manage Wilhelm's fortune and interests. The other three sons, who would each open their own branch of the family business across Europe. Salomon Mayer Rothschild, the second-born, settled in Vienna, Austria, where he built SM von Rothschild, a banking and investment entity that would see great success lending to aristocrats and funding many large capital government projects. The youngest son, James Mayer de Rothschild, moved to Paris, where he collaborated with his brother Nathan in trading gold bullion. He would later open his own successful branch, de Rothschild Frère. By 1823, de Rothschild Frère was the French government's official banker. Last to leave home was Kalman Mayer Rothschild, who was seen as the least promising of the five. He went on to open the biggest banking house in Naples. Thanks to their impact in the banking industry across the continent, the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, elevated all five brothers to the status of baron. For the several decades that would follow, the Rothschild dynasty would provide loans not just to aristocrats, but also to new European governments formed after the collapse of the previous regime. Good examples include post-French Revolution and the fall of the Roman Empire. The five banking families essentially did what the IMF does today, and as you can imagine, this large-scale lending business was massively successful. As the family amassed massive fortunes, they spread their investments in other private investments, including a vast wine estate in France, stakes in the Suez Canal, and the first major oil well in Europe. The less than successful Rothschild generations. Despite the solid foundation the first two generations of the Rothschilds had created, the latter generations struggled to maintain the family's success. The first to fall was the Naples branch in 1900 when the last male descendant died without a child. The case was the same in Frankfurt, where two Rothschild heirs bore only girls. The third branch in Austria was forced to sell their operations at a loss when Hitler came into power and escape. However, one of the heirs, Louis Nathaniel de Rothschild, was captured, forcing the family to pay an outstanding 21 million euros, the largest ransom to date, effectively bankrupting the Austria branch. As if this wasn't bad enough, the rest of their properties were seized by the Nazis. However, the French bank continued operations. That is until 1981, when the French socialists nationalized the bank. This left the London branch as the only functioning branch to make it to the 21st century, which for decades was under Sir Evelyn Rothschild, Queen Elizabeth's financial advisor until her passing in 2022. After his death, Jacob Rothschild took over. However, he too passed on in 2024. So, is the family still worth what it was? Due to the misfortune and disintegration of the Rothschild dynasty, Forbes estimates that the family is only worth about $1 billion today. Over to you, do you think the Rothschilds are secretly the richest family in the world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed watching, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.